Okay, now it should be working. Hopefully. Let's see if I get some people. It says it's scheduled for 10. I think. Oh, there we go. Okay. Sorry about that. Apparently, when you schedule it, you still have to say start streaming on YouTube and on OBS, which I already had. But anyway, hello, welcome, hi. Okay, I'll do the intro all over again because I was just talking to no one. So sorry about that. Thank you for waiting. Thank you for being here and welcome. I hope wherever you are, you're doing okay. These are strange times, to say the least. Yes, hi everyone. This is great. Okay, so yeah, and there's people from everywhere, and that's really, really awesome to see. We've got people from all over the world. You were saying in the chat, and yeah, that's cool. I wanted to do this live stream because I've had a lot of people reaching out to me recently, more than ever before, and getting a lot of questions about climate change from my most recent video, but also just I think people want connection, and I want that too. So we're going to talk today on Earth Day, the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. Happy Earth Day. We're going to talk today about climate change. I made a community post yesterday, and I did decide to do this yesterday, so it was a little last minute. Sorry for the technical difficulties. But I made a community post asking if anyone had questions about climate change, and I've already had like 40 or something questions, so I'm going to go through some of those. But if at any point you have questions about what I'm saying or questions about climate change, please let me know. I'm going to try to answer as many as possible. Wish me luck. Um, these are difficult times. It's kind of it's a wild world, not just because of the pandemic, but because of climate change and a number of different issues. So we're going to try to keep our chin up, as they say. We're going to try to keep this as positive as possible. Not that you always need to be possible, but not that you always need to be positive. I'm getting feedback. Oh, I see. Um, okay. Hopefully it should sound without any echoes. Am I wearing pants? Dandy guy is asking the real questions. Yes, I am. These are my pants. Anyway, talking about climate change, I'm just going to get right into it. And if you have any questions, let me know. The question I get asked more than any other question is, what can I do for the planet, for climate change? Philip, I think Wachter, I'm guessing is how that's pronounced, um, asked what would make the biggest change for the environment, like producing more locally, with whether that's food or just reducing my private daily journeys, like how often I go to work. What single thing would you like to see the most? This is a really big question, and it's something that I have been struggling to answer concisely for a long time. And then I eventually realized you kind of just can't answer it concisely. So I started to make an entire documentary to answer this question. Um, it's complicated. It depends on what your life is already like. Um, that determines a lot about what you can do. I would say to a lot of people that voting is the most important thing you can do for climate change, but not everybody, not everybody can vote. A lot of people that are most concerned and most impacted by climate change are, for example, young people that can't vote yet. I would say that flying is the number one thing you can do, and that's true if you fly a lot. But the most flights are taken by the wealthiest people that fly the most. So the short answer, the too long didn't read, is it depends. But some things that everyone can do, or mostly everyone can do, are if you can vote for someone that is doing that is focusing on climate action. There's a lot of politicians out there that say they care about climate change, but actually look into their policies and actually look into what they're trying to look into how advanced their climate plan is, and vote for them and support them. And you can volunteer for them. You can also protest. That's something that almost everyone in almost every country can do. You can protest for climate action. You can still do that online today, even if that's just sharing things on social media. That's helpful. Talk to friends about climate change. Um, those are all like kind of system changes that I've been mentioning mostly, aside from flying. Um, but there's also sorts of personal changes you can make. I think that a lot of people talk about, and I've had a couple questions about this, whether we should focus on changing the governments and changing the system, or if we should focus on, um, individual action, like how we live our lives day to day. I don't think we have to do one or the other. We kind of need to do both. So you can eat less meat. I get a lot of questions about that. I'm hoping to make a video about the impact of um, like on livestock, animal agriculture on the environment. Working on that, but there's a lot to unpack there, and I want to make that video right. But the summary is just eat less meat because it's better for the environment. Um, when you eat meat, so to have a cow, you have to feed it plants, and then you get meat from the cow. At every step along that chain, there's energy that's lost. It's not efficient. So if you just cut out the middleman, get rid of the cow, and just eat the plants, you can save, I think it's like 2.5 kilograms of carbon dioxide emissions every single day. So that's huge if you're eating a plant-based or a vegan diet. Um, so that's one big thing. Buy less stuff. Um, there's a whole video coming out tomorrow on YouTuber Climate Adam's channel. We talked entirely about solutions to climate change, so you can see that tomorrow for more. Okay, more questions. How does plastic, no wait. Eternal Hunter asked, how does plastic pollution affect climate change? This is something that I get asked a lot, or whenever someone says, oh, I care a lot about climate change and I'm doing everything that I can. I'm not, I'm bringing my own canvas bag to the mall or to the grocery store. I'm not using plastic bags. I get kind of frustrated by that because there is a link between climate change and plastic pollution, but by and large, they're two separate problems. Um, where to begin? Plastic pollution is a really serious problem because right now there's bits of plastic everywhere, like in the air I'm currently breathing. I made a video about that. Um, it's a major problem for oceans and wildlife. It's an issue, and there is a direct link between our addiction to fossil fuels. Basically, we're pulling out fossil fuels out of the ground and turning them into plastics. And the whole plastic industry is basically, therefore, part of the fossil fuel industry. It's related. So there's a relationship there. However, the actual emissions from, say, a plastic bag are really small. So if you want to combat climate change, if your main goal is climate change, don't focus on reducing your plastic waste, focus on the amount of emissions that you're generating. Yeah, hope that answers that. Okay, so many questions. You guys are awesome. Wow. As a fossil fuel, will the actions we take today be enough to forestall the direct impacts of climate change, or is it too little, too late? Um, that is a great question. I think it's this. I used to think about that about climate change the exact same way, but it's actually not binary, right? We think of things as like we can beat this or we can lose against it, but the reality is that climate change is already happening, and it's just going to keep happening, and temperatures are going to keep rising. However, the more action that we take, the less hot it will get. So it's not a matter of can we beat it? It's a matter of how bad is it going to get and how much can we do to make it as good as possible. Um, it's never too little, too late. It would have obviously been better if we started this 30 years ago when everyone knew about climate change. Um, but we can just do as much as we possibly can, and it's never too late. Every action you do will help the problem. Um, yeah. you're saving lives no matter what you do if you're reducing carbon emissions. Okay, I would love to hear so many things here. I'm going to go to some questions that I had because right now I'm like, you guys are amazing, but I also had some questions from earlier. Um, okay. We got a lot of questions about Jay Diggity the from earlier said, what has the impact of COVID-19 been on the environment? In brackets, because of people driving less, people using more electricity from home, variations in food consumption, etc. This is a really tricky question, and honestly, there's some ways in which it seems obvious that it should be really good for the environment. You look at cities around the world, like in Delhi, in India, and the air pollution is just gone, and that's amazing. You know, there's dolphins in canals and I think in Venice. I'm not sure. Wildlife is like coming into cities, and you look at those and you think, okay, climate. This is going to be great for climate change. And yes, there are definitely some positive impacts, but there's also long-term negative impacts that we don't know about yet. And the fact is that's going to take, I can't give an affirmative answer in either direction until the science is in and until we see how we respond to it. My biggest concern in terms of negative impact is that people will become too focused on, we need to be focused on the pandemic. We need to be doing everything we can. However, it's going to be very easy for countries, governments, and people to become complacent. And if we just totally forget about climate change, and if we just focus on rebuilding our economy, we're going to be in some serious trouble. And I know that sounds like, oh, but we won't do that. But right now, in a lot of countries, including mine, the governments are working out ways to bail out the oil industry. And that's a problem. I mean, oil, if you're following the news, just reached like crude oil reached $0 yesterday or 2 days ago. And that's never happened. The value of oil, the stocks, it's zero. Now, I'm hoping that we can learn from this whole disaster and move forward and actually say, okay, how do we want to rebuild our economy and our society in a way that is more fair and more resilient to issues like pandemics? I'm hoping we can do that, but honestly, it depends on how we act. Because if we become complacent, then it could be a net loss for the planet. So crossing my fingers. Yes, Simon Clark did do an interesting video on the subject, and Climate Adam has done a couple interesting videos. There's a whole bunch of things about aerosols. There's some debate. We need more science. Check out those two channels. Okay. Yeah, I thought someone says Lime Green Techni says, I thought the dolphin videos in the canals were faked. I don't know. I just know that I saw a video about penguins in like South America somewhere. There's all, you've seen the videos of animals coming into cities. I'm just saying, yeah, there was an example. And I'm not sure. Okay. What can we do now as individuals? I kind of mentioned that. Again, I have a video coming out tomorrow with Climate Adam on his channel. Basically, there's a lot of stuff you can do. I worry often that people focus, it's a very Western sort of mindset to focus on what you can do individually to save the world. We need to remember that we need to work together on this. So I think the more you can focus and think about the big picture, the better. So that can be as simple as just talking to people about it. That's why I'm doing this live stream with you guys. Talking about it is important. Voting, I kind of talked about this earlier on. Okay, more questions. I got a fun question from Jethro Barnett, which I think is kind of cool. I'm going to take a sip. I'm going to lose my voice by the end of this. It's only 10 minutes. It's only 10 minutes in. Okay. To what extent do you think eating insects will help reduce carbon emissions and water waste? And he continues with that. Yeah, honestly, insects are great. I've eaten insects, and they were delicious. Crickets kind of taste a little nutty, pretty good. Kind of a weird mental block to get over the grossness factor, but insects have a they're really efficient. However, um, plants are still the most efficient thing. You have to feed insects plants, and unless you're feeding them waste, which is all kinds of food safety issues, um, we should probably just be eating plants. Yeah, it's also just healthy. James Shames says, I have a question, and you know what? I'm proud of you, but I need to actually see the question. um, do any animals benefit from climate change? Yes. Well, there's some animals that benefit our from human impact on the environment. Specifically, there are a number of invasive species. I actually did my master's research on an invasive plant. And as we kind of demolish and destroy ecosystems, they become less biodiverse, meaning there's fewer species in that environment, whether it's a forest or a grassland. And what often happens is, again, as we are flying around and we're, bringing luggage with all sorts of soil and all sorts of, maybe sometimes we bring back animals from our trips abroad. What's happening is there are invasive animals and invasive species that move into those damaged ecosystems and they just take over. They find a sort of niche and they find that they're able to outcompete whatever else is there, and they just become the most populous thing in that area. That's great for those species, but it's really bad for biodiversity as a whole. Um, we are in the beginning of a mass extinction that's caused by humans, and that's a really big deal. Yeah, that means fewer species total. Okay, how did I learn all this and get too smart? Samuel Cho, I love that. Thank you. I was fortunate enough to have a good education, and I got to go to university. And then I went to I did my master's in science, which, at least in Canada, they pay you like kind of pennies, but they pay you enough to get by in your master's. Um, I just kind of once I only discovered science in the middle of university. I was actually an arts major before, and in third year I kind of stumbled into a biology class and I fell in love with it. And I've just kind of been gobbling up as much information as I could ever since then. Um, okay. Declan Liming asks, is flying domestically or internationally ever justifiable from an emissions standpoint? This is a question that I've really been struggling with personally. Flying is really bad for the environment. The emissions from it are huge, and the reason for that is not just because it's an airplane and it's hard to get something that massive off the ground, but it's hard on the environment because it's a long distance. If you actually compare the distance traveled and the emissions from, say, a car versus a plane, if they're going the same distance, let's say they're both going 1,000 kilometers, the emissions can actually end up being similar depending on how many people are in the plane or the car. But the reason that planes are bad on the environment is because you wouldn't just jump in a car and drive for 1,000 kilometers on your Saturday afternoon, right? Planes allow us to travel way more than we ever have, and we've really just kind of run with that. We just take that for granted, and people will go to the airport and buy last minute flights to somewhere, and it's an unknown destination, and we kind of glorify it. We make you know people like there's tons of viral YouTube videos about people doing that, and it just kind of breaks my heart. Because it's like, do we need to reframe? I think aside from just flying less, something we can all do to reduce airplane emissions once the pandemic is over is just stop congratulating people for flying. Stop celebrating it. I think that's an easy thing, because sometimes you need to fly. Like sometimes, there's a death in the family, or my family is really spread out. My family lives very internationally, and I'm far away from my parents now, and it's tricky. And I don't think we need to. I don't think everyone needs to stop flying 100%. It's possible we can figure out a way to get by. The issue really is, I think, people that fly all the time in frivolous ways. We need to put an end to that. I've had a few questions about carbon offsets. Um, Basically asking if carbon offsets work. Carbon offsets, if you aren't aware of them, are basically ways where you can say, okay, I took this plane ride and that generated 1 ton of emissions. I'm going to purchase some sort of way to make 1 ton of emissions get captured and go away. That's the idea of them. They are fraught with issues, and a lot of them basically just are scams. There's a lot of companies that are essentially just profiting off of um, it's complicated, but they basically profit off of saying that they're reducing emissions, but what they're actually doing is they have a company that say it's a coal plant, let's say, and that coal plant has overestimated its emissions so that it can make industrial reductions. And basically it's like, oh, we've you know installed filters in our smokestacks, and in that way we are able to reduce our emissions, and we're doing carbon capturing. That's Those are some of the things that carbon offsets can go towards. So be careful when you are investing in carbon offsets. There are sometimes, it's just people planting trees, and that may or may not be good. I believe that Tom Carroll from Aspect Science did a video about how planting trees may or may not be good for the environment, depending on the situation. Long story short with carbon offsets is that it's complicated, and it does a lot less than people think it does. So don't count on it as a way of reducing your emissions. Yeah, the real thing, and again, this is also it's kind of this idea of greenwashing. It's great to be able to get people to keep flying if they can think that they can just buy some cheap carbon offsets and the problem will go away, but it's more complicated than that. We need to keep the oil in the ground. Okay, more questions. What do I think about TeamTrees, says Gavin Risling. Um, Man, the TeamTrees thing is kind of like, I'm on the one hand, I want to love it and I want to be really excited about it. But on the other hand, I'm kind of heartbroken about it for a few reasons. Um, I know that, and again, I know that Tom Carroll made a video about this, about is TeamTrees actually good or bad for the environment? And I know that Levi Hildebrand and I did a video um, about saving trees. So there's videos on this, but I'm going to try to summarize. Basically, planting trees can or cannot be good. It depends on where they're planted. Um, Often what happens is, this is a complicated thing. Let's think about a concise way to explain this. Um, if you have a big area of land and you leave it alone, it will slowly build up an ecosystem, and trees will eventually grow there if trees grew there in the past. We have this sort of idea in our heads that to solve climate change, all we need to do is plant a lot of trees. But that's not a perfect plan. um, when So firstly, it takes a long time for a tree to grow and capture carbon. I don't know. There's a whole video on it. Miriam from Zentura is saying TeamTrees could have been great if only they had talked to any climate scientists and climate activists, and that's exactly how I feel, which I find really frustrating. It would have been way better for the planet if instead of planting new trees that may or may not survive and may or may not start forest fires and so on, it would have been better if they had basically protected forests that already exist. Because right now we are planting new forests from initiatives like TeamTrees while we deforest at I think, the fastest rate that we ever have on the planet. So that's a problem. We need to stop deforestation first and foremost. I actually did reach out um, to Mark Rober and Mr. Beast about the video before they made it, like in the summer before they made it. And I was really hoping that they would have a discussion about it with me before they went on this big journey. But anyway, their heart is in the right place, and I really appreciate that. But anyway, talk to climate scientists. People, I would include. I'm not a climate scientist, but even I would have looked into ask professionals. Okay. Have you heard about the insect? Okay, Neo Swardian 91 asks, have you heard about the decline of insect populations? I honestly think it's a bigger issue than global warming. Um, okay, and then he says global warming will likely cause countless millions to die, but isn't extinction level. So yes, I have read a lot about the insect die-offs. I know in Germany they said I think it was 33% of insect populations went away in like 2 years. I'm not sure exactly if that's the right stat, so don't quote me on that. But yes, insect populations are dying off really rapidly, and it's a big concern for ecologists. And obviously, issues like climate change are tricky because there's so many different factors to consider. It's not just, as you say, global warming. It's, increased in the extreme of weather patterns, and we also have habitat loss. Like we have more cities and more farmlands and less biodiversity, which I was talking about earlier. We have all of these problems, forest fires, flooding. We have all of these issues, and they all work to make it harder for populations of insects or animals or plants or humans to survive. And when you talk to people that have researched extinctions, they say that climate change is the leading cause of extinctions. Something that a lot of people like to say when they doubt climate change is that they say, oh, the climate has been changing forever, for millions of years. It's natural. Like, carbon dioxide levels rise and so does the temperature, and that's just a natural cycle. What they fail to recognize is that for the last 5 mass extinctions, carbon dioxide levels were very high and temperatures tended to be very high. Actually, that's not true. I think there was one where oxygen was very high. But my point being that a small difference in the concentration of a specific chemical in the air can cause a mass extinction. And that should be a concern. Oh, aren't pesticides the main issue in insect decline? That's also a big problem. I've learned more about neonics than anyone. Learned more about neonics, which is a pest. The whole. I learned a lot about insecticides without even trying to a few years ago. It's complicated, but yes, there's a big issue with a number of agricultural practices. However, I think that we also need to remember that there's 2 problems. One, farmers are just trying to feed the world, and they should be using the most advanced technologies that they have available. I'm a big advocate for genetically modified organisms because the science shows that it is better for the environment than using a lot of old pesticides. But again, it's complicated. It's never just one factor. Insecticides and pesticides are bad, but we also have issues like climate change and and habitat fragmentation and so on. Um, can I play an instrument? Thank you, Ricardo, for a light-hearted question. Yeah, I play guitar. I'm used to play a lot, but I haven't been playing nearly as much as I used to. I've slowly been learning to play piano, and that's, I gotta say, I haven't been practicing very much. I also know how to play the binary electric flute, which is an instrument that I built, and there's a whole video on that. It's a lightning flute. Um, I was like, I'm gonna design the most difficult to play instrument ever, and we're gonna see what that's like. It was a lot of work, and the video only turned out okay. Where are the climate songs? They're coming, maybe. I don't know. Um, okay. Okay. I'm gonna go to some older questions because I wanted to try to answer as many of the. There's so many questions, you guys, which is great. But um, okay. Okay. So I don't know how to say. I think his name is probably pronounced Cy Bowen. Asked, "What are some positive steps that we have made to start helping the planet?" Um, I think it's really important to try to stay optimistic, not because we are necessarily in a good place right now globally, but because it's important for your mental health. And there are legitimately some things that are worth celebrating. Before the whole COVID-19 pandemic started happening, there were more protests about climate change for climate action than ever before. And if I look back to like 2 years ago when I sealed myself in I did the Curtis in a jar experiment, sealed myself in a biodome with a couple hundred plants. Back then, and that's only 2 years ago, very few people were talking about it. There weren't a lot of mass protests. Well, there weren't protests with millions of people at them, that's for sure. And, you know, in the last 2 years, so much has changed. And I've been really excited to see how many more people are taking climate seriously and how many people are recognizing that it's really important and they need to vote for climate action and we need to actually start solving this. I think the conversation in the last 2 years has really, really changed. And if I know of any one thing that has been good for the climate, it's that. It hasn't necessarily had a huge immediate impact, but I think that we're starting to build the sort of momentum that we need to actually solve the problem. And that's fantastic. Like that is something we should actually be like patting ourselves on the back and having parties over because that's something to celebrate. Okay. Jake's channel says some nice things. Thank you so much, Jake. Uh, so a couple people have asked, what is the carbon footprint of stored information in the cloud? I don't know the answer to that. I honestly don't know if anyone would know the answer to that. I know that um, so the this is something that isn't intuitive to people. So just for a second, I'm going to give some context. Whenever we stream something like this, or whenever we share data through the internet, that takes energy to do, and often the way that we get that energy is from fossil fuels, right? So whenever we store data, say on my Google Drive, or whenever we share videos or do Zoom chats or whatever it is, that has a carbon footprint. And it's really hard to know how big that carbon footprint is because no single person owns the internet, and I don't know if anyone knows the amount of data that gets streamed on it on any given day. And it's also changing really rapidly. So like, given the crisis that we're in right now, way more people are using the internet for way more things. So I don't know. The short answer to that is I don't know. Maybe there's an expert out there that does, but it is definitely a fascinating question. I do intuitively think that, well, I know based on the total global emissions that it's a relatively small piece of the pie. Um, just to say that if you're wondering, if you're worried, let's say that, you shouldn't stream your next meeting after the pandemic. You should fly to go see this person at this conference. It's better to stream than to drive places and fly. But I don't know by how much. There's a cool XKCD comic, it's a comic that I've been reading for like a decade now. There's a cool comic where he went and tried to figure out how much storage capacity Google had, and there's like no information on it. They have huge warehouses, but I mean, they're not really, they don't need to disclose that information, and they don't. So it's kind of, he had this cool thought puzzle on it. Anyway, okay. If you guys keep asking questions about the electronics side of things, I want to remind you that I was 10 minutes late to this live stream because I couldn't even figure it out. So I wish I could answer those questions, but I kind of can't, honestly. Nuclear energy is the best option, someone says. Oh, and what do I think of solar, wind, or nuclear? Okay. Solar and wind have come so far in the last decade, even in the last few years, and they make so much sense, and we need to invest in them as much as possible. What's really cool and gets me excited about these technologies is that once we install a solar panel, it just continues to give us free energy until the panel breaks down, which is like they have really long life expectancies, right? So that's cool. And in terms of, in terms of both of those technologies, we need to invest as much as possible. I think it's probably the biggest two ways we can get around burning fuels. Things like nuclear, I really think have a lot of, they're really positive. I mean, they have their whole set of issues. They have, pollution, which we haven't honestly figured out how to deal with, and I'm concerned about that. They produce the pollution, I mean, is nuclear waste, and they have a very perceived and bad history of disaster. However, if you look at the actual stats and compare the amount of the number of lives lost from, say, nuclear plant disasters, and compare that to something like the pollution from coal, nuclear power is actually very, very harmless to humans in comparison to those other technologies. Someone ringing a bell. I hope you guys can't hear that. It's distracting to me at the very least. Okay, we're just gonna hope that it sounds like a fire alarm, but it's not from our building. Anyway, nuclear power is, it's okay. Okay. It's from the other building. This also happened yesterday. I think it's a test. Anyway, okay. All is okay. That threw me off my train of thought, though, let me tell you. For nuclear power, yes, there are disasters, and that's horrible. However, they're statistically safer than really any other fossil fuel technology. And I think the biggest problem with nuclear power is the public perception of it. People think they're really dangerous. People don't want them in their areas, and so we don't have nuclear power. And while I think that nuclear power could be great for the climate, I don't think that the public perception is going to change on that. I don't think the public's going to come around in a short enough amount of time that it'll be useful, because building a nuclear power plant takes a long time and the public hates them. So I don't think that it's actually that big of a part in the future. I do think that we shouldn't be shutting down power plants that are safe. As long as they're maintained properly, I think we need to, oh, and they're not in a, in the most dangerous, some of them are built in poor locations. But I think as long as we have that covered, then we should keep them. Okay. Nuclear. I don't know. I know you're spelling it, but I don't know if I'm Canadian. This is just how I pronounce the thing. Okay. Zeno says educational campaigns, question mark. Yeah, we need to do a lot more to educate people about not only the environment and how things like nuclear power and energy generation interact with the environment, but we also need to train people to learn to think statistically. People are really bad um, at seeing something like the Fukushima disaster that happened and thinking that therefore nuclear power is bad no matter what, right? Because it makes a better news story than, and I'm not to downplay this disaster. It was obviously horrible, um, but more news gets generated from something like that than, oh, 1,000 people died today from pollution from fossil fuels, from coal. That's not like that happens every day. So no one's writing news stories about it, which is a problem, and it's a problem in human reasoning that we need to educate people away from, I think. Um, okay, I had a question from earlier about how to deal with climate deniers, and specifically, someone was asking like, how do you not let people that deny climate change make you angry? And sometimes I do get angry. To be honest, it's really frustrating to see that people don't believe in the most fundamental issue of our entire species history. That's frustrating. But the two biggest things that I get really angry about, I'm not getting angry usually at the people. I'm getting angry at the fact that we let it get this bad, that we let our education systems falter to the point where people don't understand some very fundamental things about the environment and about science. And we have a complete mistrust. A lot of people have a mistrust in science to the point where they believe that the Earth is flat. And I've gone into that in detail, and I'm not going to right now because I don't feel like I need to for my own mental health. But that's a problem. And it's also frustrating because the reason that we have climate denial is from fossil fuel companies. Back in the 70s, fossil fuel companies figured out that the companies like Shell put scientists into the research of climate change and found that yes, climate change was going to happen. And they've been actually like changing and planning for climate change since the 70s. They started actually raising how high above the ocean their oil rigs are because they knew that sea levels were going to rise. But then I think in the 90s or in the 80s, they started doing really big misinformation campaigns. And I'm really angry that we let that happen and that we let those companies lobby for fossil fuels and against climate change. And now we have a huge proportion of the population that thinks climate change is a hoax. And that's frustrating. I get angry about that sometimes. So yeah, but I don't get angry at the people. It's honestly usually not their fault. They just don't understand, and that's sad. Okay. Man. What do I think of fusion reactors? Great question. I would love to have them. I would love to see them. They're close to being developed, but it could be they've been close to being developed for a very, very long time. So my fingers aren't crossed on it. I'm fully um, I mean, we have the tech. Something that we don't talk about very often is that we actually have all the technology that we need to stop climate change or to halt climate change. We have things like wind and solar and geothermal. Those technologies exist. We just have to implement them. Climate change is not a problem of the science. We have the technology. We just lack the understanding and the willpower, the political and public willpower to actually make it happen. That's all. Is animal agriculture a big part in greenhouse gas emissions? Yes. It's one thing that I can say across the board. Unless you have an underlying health condition, you can eat less meat and it will make a big positive impact on the environment. I've been vegetarian for like, I think 16 years and then vegan for the last few years. And that's mostly just because I know that it reduces carbon emissions. It reduces over a ton of carbon emissions every year compared to eating meat. So that's rad. It's a really simple thing to do. It's healthier. Doctors recommend eating less red meat. You don't need to cut it out entirely. Just eat less meat. It's good for you. It's good for the planet. Yeah, I think that agriculture accounts for roughly a third of all climate emissions. Something around there. I'm not entirely positive on the precise number, but it's huge. And we need food to live. Just eat less meat. Okay. Man, you guys are amazing. The number of questions, of like intelligent questions, is it's really cool to see. Something that I'm kind of been thinking about doing live streams like this for a while, and I just never have got around to it. I'm hoping that I can, especially now that we're all locked indoors, I'm hoping that I can do this more frequently. So yeah, so this has been a pleasure to see everyone here. And thanks for all the questions so far. I'm gonna do a little bit more. I'll stick around for a few more minutes and then I'm gonna go and rest my throat. Okay. How much effort and people to convince do you think it will take to stop all carbon emissions? Okay, that's a great question. There's been a number of studies that show basically like what's the threshold, right? Like how much will it take to convince people to make a big change? If you look at past social movements, whether that's the right to vote for Black people or for women in the States or and so on. If you look at any major social movement, it takes a surprisingly small percentage of the population to act in order to make a big change. And yes, granted, something like climate change is a pretty systemic problem. Like, I mean, the right to vote is huge, but that doesn't mean we have to basically change everything in our society and our economy. However, the number of people that it takes is small. It's around like, I think 3.5% of the population needs to become active and needs to fight for change in order for the change to happen. That's that's a tiny percentage of people, and we can do that. So that's exciting, and yeah, I think it's somewhere around there. That's what statisticians suggest. I don't know where we're at right now, but we certainly need a lot more people. Getting, when all of this is over, getting to the streets, or whether that's taking to social media, voting for the climate. Yeah, we can do this for sure. It's easier. It's possible. It's a possible thing. We can do this, you know? Okay. Okay. Wow. These are all paragraphs, and I'm glad that you are having conversations, but I'm finding it kind of hard to keep up. Okay. Does the state of climate change, um, the climate situation, affect my thoughts on having children? This is from Cyan, I'm guessing it's pronounced Cyan Hamilton. Oh, that's tricky. Yes, I don't have kids, and I'm not planning on having kids. Um, Partly, I mean, there's an argument to be made that, you know, kids have everyone has a carbon footprint, and if we have fewer people, then we'll have less emissions. And that argument is fine, but for me, the biggest reason that I don't want to have kids is because I'm like, it makes me sad to think of the life that they're going to live in the future that we're building for them. Because unless we take drastic action on climate change, I don't want to bring a person into this world and into that. And that's kind of sad to say, but that's where my brain's at. Um, I really don't think we should be shaming people for having children. That's absurd. I know some people are doing that right now, and that's not cool. Um, but yeah, I get it. I mean, it's a dilemma. Okay, so May Singer asked, I didn't mean to ignore your question, I just didn't see it. There's a lot. He's asking about being a future farmer and how it will affect his job in the future. Um, I will talk about agriculture a little bit. Well, not just agriculture, but right now we're in a situation where there's a lot of people that have jobs that are focused or that are required to use fossil fuels or um, that are in the fossil fuel industry. My parents are farmers. I grew up on a farm that grows seed corn, and we have a whole bunch of, my parents have a whole bunch of tractors, and there aren't really a lot of options for electric tractors at the moment. So all of this is to say that in order to make change for the climate, and if you look at any policy like the Green New Deal, one of the founding properties of those plans is that it makes sure there's a just transition for people. Meaning that if you if you work in the fossil fuel industry, let's say you are an oil rigger, we need to make sure that we can help those people find new jobs in the green economy. And any proper climate change plan takes those people into account, and it takes care of those people. That's extremely important. We need to make sure we don't leave anyone behind. One thing that I'm hopeful for in this time of COVID-19, in this pandemic, is that maybe we'll start to realize that we should have something like a basic income for people. We should just make sure that people have the food and the housing that they need to survive. That seems very basic to me. There's a really good book on it that's called, I think it's called Utopia for Realists. You should check it out if you're really skeptical about the idea of basic income. All of the research shows that it could be really, really great, and it makes a lot of sense. So I'm into that. Okay, I'll take maybe one more question, and then I'm gonna sign off. I had a few questions about Greta Thunberg earlier. Wasn't entirely sure. People seemed skeptical about Greta, and honestly, that makes me sad, largely because um, a lot of the hate that's been directed at Greta Thunberg has been spawned right out of like people in the fossil fuel industry. I think it's really easy to forget that the fossil fuel industry has billions of dollars. All of the largest companies are oil companies, and they've been pumping money into climate change denial and into smear campaigns for people like Greta since the 80s, since the 90s. And so um, yeah, Greta's amazing. She's a teenager that decided that this was an issue she wanted to do something about, and she's been fighting as hard as she can for it. And I think we need to give her as much credit as possible for that. It's remarkable what she's done, and I find her to be a huge inspiration. And yeah, I mean, before Greta, we didn't have school strikes, we didn't have mass strikes. There was one day last year where there was over 3 million people around the world that were striking for climate change. I don't know if that would have happened without her. So yeah, it's huge. She's amazing. Um, be more like Greta, as people say. Okay, I'm gonna I'm gonna have to do another one of these live streams because I see that people just continually. You guys have more and more questions. You folks have more and more questions, and I love that. But I gotta rest my throat. So thank you so much for all of your questions, for being here, and yeah, I guess I'll see you soon. Wherever you are, please take care of yourself. Stay safe. Stay indoors. Wash your hands, um, and take care of yourself mentally. Like a lot of people this is a big, hard, difficult time, not just for the climate, but because of the pandemic. So, you know, take some time to if you can take some time, just take care of your mental health and whatever that means for you. And I hope you're doing well. Thank you for being here, and I'll catch you soon. Oh, I have a video coming out tomorrow, too. One with Climate Adam on his channel and one coming out on my channel. That's about climate grief. And it was a difficult video to make because I'm not great about talking about my emotions. I've been working on getting better at that. But anyway, it was a little tricky to make it. And I hope you enjoy it. And yeah, see you guys soon. Thanks so much.